The snow had been falling since noon, and by 7 in the evening it had settled into something patient and indifferent, the kind of snowfall that doesn't hurry, that simply accumulates, inch by quiet inch, until the world beneath it is something else entirely. Cedar Falls, Ohio. Population 42,000. The kind of city that doesn't appear on lists of places to visit or avoid. It simply exists, a grid of streets named after trees that were cut down decades ago. A water tower painted the school colors of a team that hasn't won a championship since 1987, and a downtown that still functions, barely, on the stubborn loyalty of people who were born here and never quite found a reason to leave. Elm Street ran 6 blocks from the transit station to the edge of Marbury Park. At this hour, under this snow, it was the kind of street that made people walk faster without knowing why. Not because it was dangerous, exactly, but because it felt like a place designed for passing through, not lingering. The storefronts were half lit. The laundromat at the corner of 3rd put warm yellow light into the street and nothing else. A pharmacy, a nail salon, closed. A boarded window where a diner used to be. The street lamp at the intersection of Elm and 4th flickered. It had been flickering for 11 days. The city had logged the complaint. The city had not repaired it. Under that flickering lamp, at 7:14 inches the evening, 3 young men had backed a woman against the brick wall of what used to be a shoe repair shop. Her name was Claire Whitfield. She was 29 years old, a paralegal who worked for a small firm 2 blocks north. She had stayed late to finish filing, and now she was regretting it with her whole body. The way your body knows something is wrong before your mind has finished assembling the evidence. She was not small, and she was not timid. She had grown up with 2 older brothers in a house where you learned to hold your ground. But there were 3 of them, and the wall was behind her, and the street was mostly empty. The one in front was named Marcus Webb. He was 23, wore a gray jacket, unzipped despite the cold, and spoke with the particular confidence of someone who had never suffered any real consequence for his behavior. He was the one doing most of the talking. To his left was Brendan Hoyt, 22, who laughed at everything Marcus said with the kind of performative delight that wasn't really amusement, it was endorsement. He was the one who made things feel more dangerous, because his presence told Marcus that whatever he was doing was fine, was funny, was acceptable. To the right stood Trevor Finch. He was 24 and said almost nothing. He was the one Claire kept watching, because the quiet ones were harder to read. He had positioned himself not quite beside Marcus, but a step and a half ahead, angled toward the mouth of the alley to her left, blocking the obvious exit without seeming to. "You dropped something," Marcus had said, when Claire first tried to walk past. She hadn't dropped anything. "Hey, I'm talking to you." She had tried to go around him. He had stepped with her, not grabbing, not touching, just there. Always there, filling the space she was trying to move into. Now her back was against the brick, and she was calculating. She had pepper spray in her purse. Her purse was on her left shoulder. Getting to it required reaching across her body, which required that she take her eyes off Marcus's hands for 2 full seconds, which she was not willing to do. "What's your rush?" Marcus said. He smiled. The smile was the worst part. "We're just talking." "I don't want to talk. That's not very friendly." Brendan laughed. The laugh echoed off the brick in the cold air. The snow kept falling. A man in a parka walked past on the opposite side of the street, his head bent against the wind. He did not look up. A car moved slowly through the intersection, and for 1/2 second Claire considered shouting, but the car kept moving, brake lights disappearing around the corner, and the moment closed like water over a stone. The flickering lamp threw bad light, turning everyone's faces into something unreliable. She kept her breathing even. She didn't let her eyes show what she was feeling. She had been in bad situations before, not this bad. Not exactly this bad, but bad enough to know that showing fear invited escalation. "Seriously," she said. Her voice was level. "I need to go." "We all need things," Marcus said. Trevor took another half step. Two people passed at the far end of the block, a couple, walking close together under a shared umbrella. They glanced toward the lamp. One of them, the woman, slowed her stride for just a moment. Then the man said something and they continued walking, and Claire watched the umbrella disappear around the corner. And she understood, fully and without bitterness, that no one was coming. Then someone stopped. She didn't see him clearly at first. He was just a shape at the edge of the lamp's bad light, a man standing still on a street where everyone else was moving. He was carrying a paper grocery bag in one hand. He wasn't tall. He wasn't imposing. He wore a dark coat that had been good once, maybe 8 or 10 years ago. He stood there for a moment that stretched. Then he set the bag down on the sidewalk, very deliberately, very carefully, and he walked toward them. His name was Daniel Hayes, and he was 37 years old, and he was tired in the specific way of people who carry more than they should for longer than is fair. He had worked the early shift at Mercer Sheet Metal 6 to 2, then gone directly to the school to pick up his daughter, stopped at the apartment to drop her off with Mrs. Petrov next door, and driven to the other side of town to help his friend Gary move a refrigerator up 2 flights of stairs, which had taken 90 minutes and left a bruise the size of a fist on Daniel's left shoulder. Then he had driven to Save More on Corridor Road, where the prices were 20 cents cheaper per item than the Kroger 6 blocks from his apartment, and he had spent 19 minutes walking the aisles with a handwritten list and $31 in change. He bought a box of pasta, a can of crushed tomatoes, a half-gallon of milk, a bag of apples, cheddar cheese, a box of store-brand cereal, dishwasher soap, a replacement bulb for the lamp in the living room that had burned out 3 days ago, which meant that they had been eating dinner by the overhead light, which was harsh and institutional, and which his daughter Lily had complained about with the theatrical despair that 11-year-olds are capable of sustaining across several days. He had checked the total 3 times before going to the register. He was walking home because he had taken the bus to Save More and the bus had been delayed, and he had decided that he would walk the remaining 16 minutes rather than stand in the cold and wait because movement kept you warm and stillness didn't. He turned onto Elm Street at 7:12. He saw it immediately, the body language of the situation, the geometry of it, the way the 3 men had arranged themselves and the way the woman had arranged herself against the wall, and his mind assembled what was happening in the time it takes to blink. He stopped walking. Most people didn't stop, and he understood why. He had not always stopped. There had been a time, a specific, terrible time when he had not stopped, and the memory of it was the kind that doesn't fade, that stays at exactly the same brightness and clarity no matter how many years pass, the way a scar stays visible even after the wound is long closed. He was 25. He was coming back from a late shift at the same sheet metal plant, and it was summer, not winter, and the street was a different street in a different part of the city. A man and a woman were arguing on the sidewalk outside a bar. The man had his hand on the woman's arm. The woman was saying, "Stop, let go, stop." Daniel had slowed. He had looked. He had made eye contact with another man who was watching from across the street, and that man had looked away first, and Daniel had used that as a permission slip, as proof that it wasn't his problem, and he had walked on. The woman's name was Sandra Cole. He found out later from the news. She had been taken to a hospital that night with a broken orbital bone and 2 cracked ribs. He thought about Sandra Cole more than he had ever told anyone. He thought about the moment he made eye contact with the man across the street. He thought about the decision that wasn't really a decision, it was a refusal, which is a different thing, and how that refusal had made him a part of what happened next, whether he was in the room for it or not. 4 years after that night, his wife Karen had been killed by a driver who ran a red light on Clearwater Avenue. She had been 3 months pregnant with what would have been their second child. 2 people had witnessed the accident. Neither of them had stayed. A third person, a teenager on a bicycle, had called 911. Karen had been alone on that street for 9 minutes before the ambulance arrived. 9 minutes. He had not made the connection consciously at first, the two events, the two failures. The way indifference can move through the world like a weather system, affecting people miles away from its origin. He had made that connection later, slowly, the way you understand something that's been true for a long time. He had never told Lily about this. She was 11. What he told her, instead, in smaller and more ordinary moments, was this: you don't get to look away and still call yourself a good person. He told her that when they saw a dog tied to a parking meter in the rain. He told her when they saw a kid getting picked on at the park. He worked to make it something she understood, not as a rule but as a reflex. He was standing on Elm Street with $31 of groceries at his feet, and the woman's back was against the wall, and none of the three men had noticed him yet. He thought about Lily, waiting at Mrs. Petrov's apartment. He thought about the pasta getting cold. He thought about his shoulder. He thought about the bus he had missed and the walk he had already done and the fact that he had to be at the plant at 6 in the morning. And underneath all of that, quieter and more persistent, he thought about what it would feel like to walk past. To turn the corner, go home, eat dinner, tuck Lily in, to wake up tomorrow and carry this with him. He had carried Sandra Cole for 12 years. He did not want to carry another name. He had once asked Hector Okafor, the trainer at Cornerstone, the man who had taught him that fighting was mostly about not getting hit, whether he had ever been afraid in a ring. Hector had looked at him for a long moment and said, "Every time. The ones who say they're not afraid are lying, or they haven't been hit hard enough yet." Then he had said something else. Fear's not the question. Fear's just information. The question is what you do after you've processed it. Daniel had processed it. He processed it in approximately 4 seconds on an icy sidewalk in Cedar Falls, Ohio, while the snow fell and the lamp flickered, and a woman he had never met stood with her back against a brick wall. He set the bag down. He was careful with it, placed it against the base of the lamppost, upright, so the milk would not tip. Then he straightened and checked that his coat was unzipped enough to allow movement. Then he walked forward. The snow on Elm Street had compacted into something denser under the weight of foot traffic, and it made a sound under Daniel's boots, a deliberate, rhythmic compression that carried farther in the cold air than he expected. Marcus heard it first. He turned his head. Daniel kept walking. He stopped about 8 feet away, which was not a safe distance and not a threatening one. It was the distance of someone who intended to be involved. "Let her go," he said. His voice was even, not loud. There was no performance in it, no bravado. It was the voice of someone stating a fact that he expected to be taken seriously. Marcus looked at him the way people look at something unexpected, a flicker of recalibration, quickly covered. He took a slow, deliberate look at Daniel's coat, his boots, his grocery bag on the sidewalk behind him. The full assessment. "Who are you?" Marcus said. "Doesn't matter." "You're right, it doesn't. So keep walking." "I'm not going to do that." Brendan stopped laughing. He turned all the way around, which meant he was no longer watching Claire, which meant Claire used those 2 seconds to shift her weight and get her hand closer to her purse. She didn't reach for it yet. She watched the man in the old coat. "This doesn't concern you," Marcus said. "It does now," Daniel said. There was a pause. The lamp flickered. A gust came down the street and threw a thin spray of snow across the ground, and the sound of the city distant traffic, a siren somewhere east, seemed very far away. "Old man," Brendan said, finding his voice again, "you have no idea what you're doing." Daniel looked at him. Just looked. Brendan's smile didn't quite stay put. Trevor had not moved. He was watching Daniel with the careful, measured attention that Daniel found most concerning. Not the loud one, never the loud one. But Trevor was 3 inches taller and 40 pounds heavier, and he was standing at an angle that suggested he had been in situations like this before and had thought, at some prior point, about how they worked. "She's going to walk away now." Daniel said. He was still talking to Marcus, because Marcus was the one whose decision this was. You three are going to let her do that. Marcus spread his hands, a gesture of theatrical reasonableness. We were just talking. You were blocking her. That's not talking. She could have left any time. She can leave now, Daniel said. Go ahead, he said to Claire, without taking his eyes off Marcus. Claire moved. She stepped sideways along the wall, keeping her back to the brick until she was clear of Trevor's orbit. Nobody stopped her, not because they had decided to let her go, but because in that specific moment all three of them were focused on Daniel, calculating, and she used that moment with the exactness of someone who had been measuring it since it opened. She didn't run. She walked, quickly, deliberately, to Daniel's left and slightly behind him. You should have kept walking, Marcus said. He wasn't smiling anymore. Probably, Daniel said. You're going to regret this. I've regretted the other thing longer. Marcus frowned. Didn't understand. Didn't need to. He looked at Brendan. Brendan looked at Trevor. Trevor had already made his decision and was already moving, and the next 12 seconds happened very fast. Trevor came from the right. Daniel had been watching Trevor for the last 90 seconds, had been aware of Trevor the way you're aware of the edge of a roof, peripherally, constantly, without staring. He had catalogued the way Trevor stood, the way his weight was distributed, the forward lean that meant he was not the kind of person who waited. When Trevor moved, Daniel was already pivoting. Trevor had reach and weight. Daniel had spent 6 years, between 26 and 32, training 3 nights a week at a gym on Prescott Avenue called Cornerstone, a boxing gym run by a retired middleweight named Hector Okafor, who had the philosophy that fighting was mostly about not getting hit, which was different from most people's philosophy. Daniel had stopped going regularly when Lily was born, then stopped entirely after Karen died, because there was no time and no money. But the body remembers what it learned, and what Daniel had learned was patience and geometry. Trevor's first reach was a grab going for the collar, trying to control. Daniel stepped inside it, which was the unexpected direction, and the grab found air. Daniel's elbow came up and made contact with Trevor's forearm. Not a strike, just a redirect, and then he was beside Trevor rather than in front of him, and his hand was on Trevor's wrist, and one controlled rotation later, Trevor was facing the brick wall with his arm at an angle that made moving complicated. Trevor made a sound that was mostly surprise. Brendan was already moving less carefully than Trevor, more emotionally. He was loud about it. He came forward with a wide swing that was easy to see and easy to duck, and Daniel let it pass over his shoulder and used Brendan's own momentum to move him sideways into the street lamp post. The contact was solid. Brendan sat down on the snowy sidewalk with an expression of genuine bewilderment. Marcus had not moved during this. This was the interesting thing about Marcus. He talked well and positioned well and delegated well, but when the delegation failed, he stood very still, recalculating. Daniel stepped back to a neutral position, breathing through his nose, hands open at his sides. Trevor was still by the wall, rotating his shoulder carefully. He looked at Daniel with something that was no longer aggression, it was assessment, the kind that comes after you've learned something about a person. Brendan was sitting on the sidewalk, touching his shoulder. The snow fell. The lamp flickered. No one's hurt, Daniel said. This was true, and he had made sure it was true. He had not hit anyone. He had redirected and controlled and waited, and nothing that had happened in the last 12 seconds required a hospital or a report, which was how he had wanted it. No one's going to be hurt, but we're done here. He looked at Marcus. Marcus held the look for 3 full seconds. Then, something in his face shifted, not defeat, exactly, but the recognition of an unfavorable calculation. He tilted his head slightly toward Brendan, who was getting to his feet, and then toward Trevor, who had moved away from the wall. Come on, Marcus said. They left. Not running, walking, the way people leave when they want to preserve some dignity in departure. Marcus last, and he looked back once, and Daniel held the look until Marcus turned the corner. Then, they were gone. The street was quiet again. The lamp flickered. Claire Whitfield was standing 6 feet behind Daniel's left shoulder. She had not left. She had had plenty of opportunity to leave, and she had not taken it. And when Daniel turned around, he found her, standing in the snow with her arms folded tightly across her chest, and her expression caught between several things at once. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes." She said it quickly, automatically, and then seemed to hear herself say it, and her shoulders dropped slightly. I don't know. My hands are shaking." "That's normal," he said. "It'll pass in a few minutes. Your body's processing adrenaline. It takes a little while." She nodded as though she understood this intellectually and found it only moderately useful. She looked at him. She was taking him in the way she hadn't been able to, while the other 3 were there. The worn coat, the lines around his eyes, the specific tiredness of someone who works physically for a living and is at the end of a long day. The grocery bag he was retrieving from the sidewalk where he'd left it, checking to make sure the milk hadn't tipped. He did this last thing, the check of the milk, with such ordinary, domestic care that it produced in her a feeling she couldn't name, something about the contrast. The same hands that had redirected Trevor's wrist with the precision of someone who knew exactly what he was doing, now cradling a paper bag and tilting a milk carton to confirm the seal. "You set your groceries down," she said. "I needed my hands free. You came back for them. Lily needs cereal in the morning," he said. And then seemed to hear how ordinary that sounded and almost smiled. It was not quite a smile, more a brief release around the eyes, the corners of his mouth moving slightly, as though he was aware of the absurdity of groceries in this context and was allowing himself to find it gently funny. Claire exhaled. It came out shaky. She pressed her fingers against her mouth for a moment, not to stop tears. Exactly. She was not crying yet. That would come later. At home, in the good way that follows fear, but to take a breath and let her body understand that the thing was over. He looked away to give her the space of it, watching the empty corner where the 3 men had gone. "Why did you help me?" she said. He picked up the bag. He checked the seam where the paper had gotten damp from the snow. "I have a daughter," he said. The words sat in the cold air. She waited to see if there was more. There wasn't, not immediately. He was looking down the street, not at her. And his expression was the expression of someone who has said the true thing and doesn't need to elaborate it. "She's 11, he added. "And she—" He stopped, started again. "When I'm not with her, she's out in the world, and the world is." He shook his head slightly. "I hope that if she were ever in a situation like this, someone would stop." Claire's eyes were bright. The cold could have explained it. "Someone did stop," she said. "Tonight? I almost didn't." She looked at him. "For a second," he said. Standing back there. "I thought about just." He exhaled. The breath was white in the cold air. "I used to be the kind of person who kept walking. I was wrong about that. I've known I was wrong about that for a long time. What changed?" He was quiet for a moment. The snow fell between them, indifferent and patient. "I lost someone," he said. "And the people who could have helped didn't." He said it without bitterness. The bitterness had been there once. He'd had a long time to work through it. What remained was not bitterness but a kind of knowledge, the kind that costs something to acquire. "I don't want to be those people." Claire nodded slowly. She was pressing her thumb against the strap of her purse, a small, unconscious movement. "What's your name?" she said. "Daniel." "Claire." She extended her hand and he shook it, which was slightly formal and slightly absurd given the circumstances, and they both seemed to feel it, and neither of them laughed exactly, but something softened between them. "Go home," he said. "Warm up. Don't walk this block alone at night for a while." "I know. Is there someone you can call to walk you to your car?" "I'll call my coworker. She's still at the office." Claire was already reaching for her phone, and Daniel could hear the practicality returning to her movements, the efficiency of someone reassembling themselves after a scare. She was going to be okay. He could see that. He picked up the grocery bag with both hands. "Thank you," she said, and she said it with a weight that was not proportional to the sound of the words. He nodded. He turned and walked north toward the transit station, his boots making that patient compressed sound on the snow, and she watched him go until he turned the corner at 3rd Street and was absorbed by the dark and the white. The walk home from the transit stop took 7 minutes in good weather. In snow, with the sidewalks uneven and the streetlights patchy, it took 9. Daniel knew the route without thinking left on Alcott, past the dry cleaner, across the parking lot of the old bank building that had been a bank and then a dentist's office and was now nothing, up the exterior stairs of the Milburn Arms to the 3rd floor. He stopped at Mrs. Petrov's apartment first. Apartment 3A. He knocked twice. Agnes Petrov was 68 years old and had lived in the Milburn Arms for 31 years and watched 3 different families cycle through 3C before Daniel and Lily arrived 4 years ago. She had known Karen briefly, before the accident, and she had watched what the loss did to Daniel, the way grief can make a person methodical and careful in a way that looks like recovery but is actually a form of armor. She had also watched what happened when Daniel looked at Lily, which was different, which was the absence of armor. The one place where he had decided that the armor was too expensive. She opened the door, and Lily was already behind her in the hallway. "Dad!" Lily came past Mrs. Petrov without being fully stopped, which Mrs. Petrov permitted because she understood the geometry of that relationship. She was 11, nearly 12, with Karen's dark eyes and Daniel's particular way of frowning, which was to say, the frown that asked a question rather than expressing displeasure. She looked at him the way she always looked at him when he was late. The frown. "You're wet," she said. "It's snowing. You've been in the snow for a while." She pressed her finger to the sleeve of his coat and showed him the moisture. "How long did you walk?" "About a mile." "Why didn't you wait for the bus?" "Because I'm impatient," he said, which was not true but was the kind of not truth that didn't require more conversation. He stepped back to look at her. She was in her school clothes still, and there was a smear of something ink, probably on her left palm. "Are you hungry?" he said. "I've been hungry for an hour," she said. "I've got pasta," he said. She made a face. She had made this same face about pasta every other week for 2 years. He chose to interpret it as affection. "With cheese?" she said. "With cheese." She held out her hands for the grocery bag. He passed it to her. She looked inside. "You got Granny Smith's," she said. Her voice rose slightly with what she would never call delight. "Those were the only ones left. Those are the best ones." "I know," he said. He thanked Mrs. Petrov, who asked no questions because she was experienced at recognizing when someone had had a complicated evening, and then he and Lily walked the 12 steps from 3A to 3C, and he unlocked the door. The apartment was what it was. 620 square feet, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that was technically a kitchen because it had a sink and a stove, and a living room that served also as a hallway and a dining room, and a place where Lily did her homework at the table by the window, while Daniel tried to read after her bedtime, and usually fell asleep in the chair. The overhead light was on in the living room, institutional and harsh, filling the apartment with the kind of illumination that reveals everything and makes nothing look good. "You got a bulb," Lily said, pulling the box out of the bag. "For the lamp." Finally. She did not mean it critically. She meant it in the tone of someone who has been patient and is glad the waiting is over. Daniel took the bulb out of the box and went to the lamp in the corner of the living room, a floor lamp, wooden base, which had been Karen's and which had traveled with them through 2 apartments since the one they had shared. He unscrewed the dead bulb, installed the new one, and turned it on. The light was warm. Amber warm, the way lamps used to be before everything became LED blue-white. It pushed back the institutional harshness of the overhead and laid a softer geography over the room. The worn couch, the stack of library books on the coffee table, the drawing Lily had done last week, of what appeared to be either a cat or a small bear, which was taped to the wall beside the window. He turned off the overhead. Lily, who was in the kitchen beginning the water for pasta, looked through the doorway at the new light. "Better," she said. "Yes," he said. He stood in the warm lamplight for a moment and let himself be still. He thought about Claire Whitfield, probably home by now. Probably sitting somewhere with a cup of tea and the slight unreality that follows a near thing. He thought about what he had said to her, "I almost didn't," and how true that was, and how the almost was important to acknowledge. The almost was not an excuse. The almost was the gap between what he used to be and what he had chosen to become. And he had to keep choosing, every time, or the gap would close in the wrong direction. He thought about Sandra Cole, whom he had never met and never would. He thought about Karen, alone on Clearwater Avenue for 9 minutes in June. He turned toward the kitchen. "How was school?" he said. Lily was standing at the stove, watching the pot with the serious attention she brought to things she found interesting, which included cooking, which she had recently decided was scientific enough to merit focus. "We had a substitute in English," she said. He didn't know the book. "What book?" "Roll of Thunder." "Hear My Cry." Daniel took the pasta from the bag and set it on the counter beside her. "What did you think of it?" "I think he should have read it before trying to teach it," she said, without malice. "Just accuracy. That's fair." I told him what the chapter was about. She glanced at him sideways the way she did when she was checking to see if she'd done something he would consider overstepping. He'd told her before. There's a difference between being right and being rude about being right. She was still working on the calibration. How did he take it? "He said thank you," she said. "And then he asked me 3 more questions." Daniel smiled. He started opening the can of tomatoes. "Good," he said. She poured the pasta into the boiling water and watched the pieces separate. "Yeah, were you really just walking before? When you were late?" He set down the can opener. The question was not an accusation. It was the question of someone who knows you well enough to notice when something is different, and who trusts you enough to ask. He had taught her to ask questions, to not be someone who just accepted what she was given when something felt incomplete. He thought about lying. Not a dramatic lie, just a small, protective rounding off, the kind parents use to shield their children from the sharpness of the world. He decided against it, not because lying was impossible, but because she would eventually be old enough to understand, and he wanted her to know that the world had sharp edges, and that the right response to them was not to pretend they weren't there. "I saw something happening," he said. She was watching him now. A woman was being bothered by some men. "I asked them to leave her alone." Lily was quiet for a moment. She was processing, he could see it in the frown, the specific one that asked a question. "Were you scared?" she said. He thought about it honestly. "For a moment," he said. "But mostly I was thinking about what needed to happen." "Is she okay?" "She's okay." Lily turned back to the pasta. She stirred it with the wooden spoon she had claimed as hers at some point in the past year, and which she would not let Daniel use for anything else. She stirred it 3 times. "I would have stopped too," she said. He looked at the back of her head, the dark hair, the slight forward lean that she always had when she was focused on something. "I know," he said. "I mean it," she said. "I know you do," he said. "That's why I'd do anything for you." She made a sound that wasn't quite embarrassment and wasn't quite pleasure, something in between, the sound an 11-year-old makes when a true thing has been said and she doesn't quite know how to hold it yet. She kept stirring. He went back to the tomatoes. They ate at the kitchen table. This was the rule, not the couch, not in front of anything. At the table. It had been Karen's rule first, and Daniel had kept it. And Lily had grown up with it so deeply that she didn't think of it as a rule anymore, just as what dinner was. He had made the sauce with crushed tomatoes and garlic, and the dried basil that had been in the cabinet for 6 months, and might have lost some of its authority by now, but it still worked. He had grated the cheddar over both bowls because they didn't have Parmesan, and Lily had accepted this upgrade to their usual protocol without comment. The lamp in the living room reached the kitchen doorway. It didn't quite make it to the table, but it softened the overhead enough that the room had a different character than it had had for the last 3 days. "Better light," Lily said. "You mentioned." "I'm mentioning again." She twirled pasta onto her fork with the technical focus of someone who took pasta seriously. "Did you know that the color of light affects your mood?" "I've heard that. We learned about it in science. Something about wavelengths. Blue light is for alertness, and warm light is for she." Paused. "Something about calm. Rest. I forgot the exact word. That explains why the overhead makes me feel like I'm being interviewed," he said. She laughed, a genuine laugh, not performed. He collected her laughs the way some people collect things of value, because they were, and he knew it. "Yeah. Do you ever get lonely?" The question was different from her other questions tonight, less practical, more interior. She was watching him with a directness that he recognized. She got that from Karen, too. Karen used to ask direct questions at dinner. Serious ones. Treating the table as a place where things could be said honestly because the food gave you something to do with your hands and your eyes. He thought about his answer. "Sometimes," he said. "Yeah, me too," she said. "Sometimes." He looked at her. "School?" he said. "Partly." She moved a piece of pasta. "Just sometimes." She didn't elaborate. He didn't press. He understood that sometimes was sometimes not a crisis, just an honest report from the interior. "You can always tell me," he said. "I know," she said. "I am telling you." "Right," he said. "Good." She ate. He ate. The lamp held its warmth from the other room. "When I'm older," she said, "after a while, I want to be the kind of person who stops." He set down his fork. "You already are," he said. "I haven't been tested yet." "Yes, you have," he said. "Last October, the kid at the park, Marcus Teller." She frowned, surprised he remembered the name. "He was being left out on purpose," Daniel said. "Everyone walked away from him, and you went over and asked him if he wanted to play." "That's stopping." "That's different," she said. "It's not different in the way that matters," he said. She thought about this. He could see her thinking about it, putting it alongside something, measuring. "Okay," she said, eventually. "Okay," he said. They finished dinner. He washed the bowls. She dried. This was also the rule, not her rule originally, but she had adopted it early and held to it with the consistency that he found alternately exhausting and deeply reassuring about her character. She did not walk away from things that needed doing. She didn't walk away. He tucked her in at 9, or rather, he stood in her doorway while she arranged her pillows in the specific configuration that she required, which took a minute, and which he had learned not to rush, and then he said good night, and she said good night, and he turned off her light. He went to the living room and sat in the chair that was comfortable in the specific way of old furniture that has been shaped by years of one person sitting in it. The lamp was on. The book he was reading was on the side table, a crime novel set in Scandinavia that was good, but that he had been reading for 3 months because he could only manage 15 minutes before sleep came for him. He opened it to his page. He read 2 paragraphs. Then he set the book down and sat with the lamp's amber light and thought about the evening. He thought about the moment he had set the grocery bag down on the sidewalk. That moment, the deliberate act of setting it down, had felt important in a way he hadn't fully processed yet. It was a commitment. Once you put the bag down, you had announced something. There was no version of that action that was casual. He had made a statement to himself and to whatever part of the world was watching. He thought about Trevor, the quiet one, the dangerous one, and the moment Trevor had moved, and the 12 seconds that followed. He was not proud of the physical part in the way that some people might be. He didn't feel powerful or righteous or victorious. He felt something more like relief that he had been capable, that the training had stayed in his body, that it had ended without real harm to anyone. He had not wanted to hurt them. He had wanted them to stop, and they had stopped, and that was sufficient. He thought about Claire's face when she said someone did stop. Tonight, he thought about what she didn't know that the someone almost hadn't. The almost. He had stood there on the sidewalk for a moment, genuinely stood there, genuinely hesitated, and in that moment, he had felt the weight of $31 of groceries and a tired shoulder, and the 9-minute walk home and a daughter who needed cereal in the morning, and all of those things had said, "Keep walking. It's not your problem. You can't save everyone." And those things were not wrong. He couldn't save everyone. It was not his job to fix the world. And there was real cost to inserting yourself into situations involving 3 young men who were larger than you and without conscience. But Claire was not everyone. Claire was one person, right there, right now, and he was the person who happened to be present. And presence carries a kind of obligation that distance doesn't. That was the thing he had come to understand. You don't owe the whole world, but you owe the person in front of you. He owed her the 30 seconds it took to stop. He owed her his presence. There was something else, too, something he hadn't fully articulated to himself until now. Sitting in the lamplight with the book closed in his lap. He had needed to stop, not for heroic reasons, not because he was the kind of person who goes looking for situations like that, but because the alternative, walking past, eating dinner, falling asleep in this chair would have confirmed something about himself that he had spent 12 years refusing to confirm, that he was the kind of person who calculated and found the cost too high, that he was, at the core of it, someone who let things happen. He was not that person. He had decided not to be that person, and the decision required renewal. The way a commitment made once is not a commitment made forever. You had to make it again, each time. Some nights it cost almost nothing, a small thing, easy, barely a pause in the day. Tonight it had cost a bruised shoulder and a cold walk and a near thing on an icy street. He was content with the exchange. He picked up the book again. The detective in Scandinavia was in a forest, following a bad man. Daniel read 3 pages before his eyes started failing him. He closed the book. The lamp stayed on, he sometimes forgot to turn it off, and found it warm rather than wasteful to come out at midnight and find the room still lit. He went to bed. At 10:45, Lily woke up thirsty, which was a thing she had done every few nights for as long as he could remember. She padded to the kitchen in her socks, drank 2 glasses of water with the serious efficiency of someone replenishing a deficit, and then went back down the hall. She paused at the living room doorway. The lamp was on. Her father's book was closed on the side table. The room held its warmth in the specific way that rooms do when someone has recently been present in them, a residual warmth, like an impression left in fabric. She stood in the doorway for a moment, not quite entering. She was 11 years old, which meant she was old enough to understand most things and young enough to feel them fully, without the protective distance that adults develop over time like a callus. She felt things directly. She was working on learning when that was an asset and when it was a liability, and she was not done working on it. She looked at the drawing she had taped to the wall, the cat or bear drawing, which she knew was a cat, actually. She had just not been satisfied with the ears. She was going to redraw it. She had been saying she was going to redraw it for 3 weeks. She looked at the library books on the coffee table, which included one on oceanography and one on medieval castles, and one she had checked out for her father about repairing old furniture because he had mentioned once wanting to fix the kitchen chair. He had not yet read it. She had left it somewhere visible, which was her method. She found that if she left things visible and did not mention them directly, he noticed them eventually and did something about them. This was how she operated in general, not pushing, just placing. She had learned this from watching him. She looked at the room. She thought about what he had told her at dinner, the woman, the street, the stopping. She had known, even before he told her, that something had happened. She had known because of the way he was when he came in, the particular stillness that she associated with him, having moved through something difficult and arrived on the other side of it intact. She knew her father's stillness the way you know a house's particular silences, having grown up in them. His stillness was not emptiness. That was the thing she had taken a long time to understand. When she was younger, she used to confuse his quietness with distance, used to wonder if he was somewhere else in his mind, somewhere she couldn't reach. Then she had understood that his quietness was the opposite of distance. It was the way he paid attention. Most people talked when they were paying attention, filled the air with words to prove they were present. Her father got quiet. He got still. It was how she knew, at dinner, when something she said had actually landed, he wouldn't respond immediately, would just go slightly quieter. And later he would come back to it, sometimes hours later, sometimes the next day, and say something about it that showed he had been turning it over. She thought about what it meant that he had stopped. Not the mechanics of it. The mechanics were his business. He had made that clear in the telling by keeping certain details general. But the fact of it, that he had been on a street with groceries and tired shoulders and 9 minutes from home, and something had happened that required someone to stop, and he had been the one to stop. She stood in the doorway of the lamp-lit room, thinking, he had said. She had heard that. She was writing it down, in the part of her that stores things not as memories but as principles, the part that was still being assembled, still figuring out its architecture, but that already had some foundations that were solid. You stop. That was the foundation. You stop, and you put the bag down, and you say, "It does now." She went back to bed. She lay in the dark with her hands folded on her chest, the way she did when she was thinking rather than trying to sleep. Through the wall, she could hear nothing. Her father was already asleep, or close enough. The apartment was quiet in the way it always was at this hour. The particular silence of a small place holding two people who trusted each other, she thought. He carried a grocery bag and a bruised shoulder and 12 years of something he had never fully named for her. He walked home in the snow on the wrong side of tired. He saw something on a street that didn't have to be his business, and he set the bag down, and he made it his business anyway. She thought, I want to be that. Not the physical part, though she was already thinking about whether she could convince him to take her to that gym on Prescott Avenue, the one he had mentioned once. Not the brave part, because she wasn't sure bravery was the right word for what he had done. It was something quieter than bravery, more deliberate. He had looked at what was happening, and he had looked at himself, and he had made a choice about what kind of person he was going to be, and then he had acted accordingly. That was not bravery. That was character. Character was what you did when no one was making you, and the cost was real. She would think about this for a long time. She would think about it at 14, when a girl in her class was being excluded by the rest of the group, and Lily would be the first one to cross the invisible line and sit with her. She would think about it at 19 in a parking lot outside a bar when she saw something that needed someone to stop. She would think about it at 27 when she was a public defender and a client no one believed in, needed someone in their corner who would not calculate the odds and walk away. She didn't know any of that yet. She was 11, and it was late, and the snow was falling outside her window. She closed her eyes. Outside the Milburn Arms, the snow had quieted but not stopped. It fell in smaller flakes now, scattered, the way a storm disperses in its final hour. The parking lot held an inch and a half, untouched by footprints, clean as a page. The light from the third-floor window of apartment 3C, the warm amber light, lay on the snow in a long rectangle, yellow and steadfast, reaching into the cold dark. By morning it would be covered, but for now it was there. Some nights the world stays cold, but sometimes one person decides it doesn't have to. And sometimes that person has $31 and a bag of Granny Smith apples, and a daughter who's watching, and a lamp that finally works.